back. It's not the Bible.
Right. It's
okay?
not the Bible.
The Constitution is not the Bible. The Bible doesn't say, here's how you can change me.
Right.
Right? Here's how you can add new things to me.
Right.
It is a governing document that fallible human beings wrote up, and they were like ready to be done with their volunteer group project. And they're like, I think we got some good ideas in here, but you know what? If y'all need to change it in the future, here's how you might do that.
Oh, Sharon, it's so good to see you again. Thank you for, I texted you, I think on like a few days ago. I was like, hey, I have this idea. And you're like, let's make it happen. So thanks for making time. It is good to have you back on the show. We had you on a few months ago. It was great. I'm sure you saw it too from your audience, the crossover everyone wanted. So it happened. Yep. And I'm bringing you on because I need you to go full on just teacher on me and the audience about how elections actually work. Because I got to be honest, as I'm learning more about our political system, I actually am still pretty confused on a lot of things, like why third-party candidates never seem to get any serious traction. And for a long time, I thought, well, that's because the DNC and RNC agree on one thing, no third party. But also I had someone say, well, that could be true, but also our system isn't really set up for third party. I'm like, wait, what do you mean? So I'm hoping today you can just teach us governors, how voting in America actually works. What is the electoral college versus the popular vote? Like, I need the full gamut today. Can you do that for us?
That is well within my wheelhouse, and I'm happy to help.
It's like I knew someone who could handle this. So why don't we start here? And maybe if you have to back up, that's fine. Why do third-party candidates never, ever, ever seem to get serious traction in America? Let's just start with that question.
Yeah. Well, okay. First of all, third-party candidates have gotten traction in the past. And by the past, I mean the mid-19th century. Because what was the Republican Party in the mid-19th century but a third party? Right? So Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president. Prior to that, we had Democratic Republicans or Federalists. We had Whig presidents. The Republican Party was a third party in the mid 1800s. But one of the reasons today that we no longer see successful third parties winning the presidency or even getting anywhere close is because of the way the Electoral College currently works. The Electoral College has not always worked the way it does today. And our current system of Electoral College structure greatly diminishes the likelihood that a third-party candidate will have success. And so the reason that, or the way that the current system works is 48 out of 50 states use something called a winner-take-all system. And this is a little bit, go ahead. Go ahead and interrupt.
But you said 48 out of 50. So this is not a federal thing? Is this up to every state?
No, every state gets to decide how they want this to work for themselves. Yes. Two states have been like, well, that's not how we want to do it. Maine and Nebraska are like, we're going to do it our own way. The other 48 states have decided on something different. And over time, what the states have decided has morphed. And so our current system, if you look at the early elections in the United States, the Electoral College was all over the place. 40 votes for this guy, 27 votes for that person, 19 votes for this person, 32 votes for that person. It was not a winner-take-all system like we use now. So let me explain how winner-take-all works, because this is really important to understand.
Yes. Okay.
It's a little bit like having a popularity contest in each state.
Okay.
And we say, who is more popular? Who's better? Is it Tim or is it Sharon? And all of the people go to the polls and they're like, it's definitely Tim. Tim is way better here. He's
just
more
the
popular.
Tattoos. That's the only difference. You know?
He's more popular here. And Tim is like, thank you. Most popular in Philadelphia, most popular in Pennsylvania. I win. Thank you. Thank you. And we go around each state. Who's more popular? Who's better, Tim or Sharon? And we have a popularity contest in each state. Okay. Now, when you win the popularity contest in Pennsylvania, as you would, because it's your home state, right? Or you're near your home
Jersey,
state.
But I'm very
near
close.
Your home state.
Yes,
you have the regional affinity.
Yes,
definitely.
Definitely.
New Jersey wins, you win the popular vote or popularity contest in New Jersey. then you get to invite your own friends to the Electoral College. It's like having a giant party. You get to control the guest list. And I get to invite none of my friends. You get to invite 100% of your friends, and I get to invite 0 of my friends. And in the states that I win, maybe I'll win in the state of Minnesota, my home state, I get to control the guest list. I get to invite 100% of my friends, and you get to invite 0% of your friends. So if you think about it in the context of we're having popularity contests in each state. Whoever wins the popularity contest controls the guest list at the Electoral College. You get 100% of the guests. I get none of the guests. So that's essentially what winner take all is. You are entirely controlling the guest list in your state for the Electoral College, and I get nothing. So what happens then is if you win with 50%, 50.1% of the vote, and I win with and I lose with 49.9% of the vote, I still get to invite 0 of my friends. You get to invite
Winner take
all of your friends.
All or nothing.
It's as if my friends don't exist. It's as if everybody who voted for me gets their vote thrown out. Only you get to control the vote. Only you get to control the guest list to that party called the Electoral College in your
And
state.
is that the numbers that we're talking about? Like, CNN says, like, was it the road to 274? However many delegates you need?
Yes.
Is it electorates? What's the right terminology here? Like, what you actually
they're
need?
called electors. Yes,
Electors.
Electors.
Okay, and so the whole plan is to win the states to get you to that road to win the majority.
You need 270 friends at your parties. And whoever gets 270 friends at their parties around the country gets to be the president.
Okay. Helpful so far. I have a lot of questions. Let's start with this one. Why do we have the electorates instead of just a popular vote? Because you mentioned, like in New Jersey, for example, right? If I win 50.1%, that's the majority. I get all those things. But why not just 51% of New Jersey voted for me, so I get all of those votes? Like, why do we have this college thing to begin with?
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things about the Electoral College. The first thing is that college is just a name of a group. It's not. It's like when you call a group of crows a murder of crows. You know what I mean?
Why
it's
do
not
we do that?
actually a murder. It's just a group. Okay, so the Electoral College is the name of a group. It's not actually like a university or a place that you could graduate from. There's no classes. There's also no place. There's no such location as the Electoral College. There's no like, here's the office of the Electoral College in Washington, D.C. It's not even an entity that is like an overseeing organization. It's not a thing. It's an idea. So why we have it is, goes back in history. Back in time when people believed that there was a right group of people to vote and a wrong group of people to vote. And we all know that they wrote ideas into the Constitution that today we're like, well, that's trash, right? That women can't vote, that people of color can't vote, that only wealthy white men can vote. Today we know that idea is trash. Right. But at the time, that was the thinking, that wealthy white men, land-owning Caucasian males should be allowed to vote. Well, there was a lot of arguing at the Constitutional Congress about or the Constitutional Convention. Let me say that again. There was a lot of arguing at the Constitutional Convention about how to choose the president. Some people wanted Congress to choose the president, and that's actually how it works in most other democracies. Congress chooses, or their parliament chooses the prime minister. Some people thought Congress should choose the president. Other people thought they should be chosen by state legislatures, meaning the state legislature of New Jersey should help vote for the president. Nobody really thought, let's have a popular vote. And let's let everybody vote. Let's let all the citizens vote. That was not really on the table. Wow. And this is a thing that I think a lot of people forget or never learned, is that the Electoral College was added to the Constitution at the last minute as a compromise. A small committee got together They were hammering out some of the final details, and they emerged from that committee meeting, from this volunteer group project that was writing the Constitution. They emerged from their volunteer group project and have inserted the Electoral College into the draft of the Constitution. And in an effort to try to get things done. So they've been meeting all summer. It is now September.
Right.
Going to the Constitutional Convention was actually a pretty big sacrifice. As I mentioned, it's a volunteer group project. You're away from home all summer long. You are stuck in this tiny space with all of these people. It's extremely hot. There's no air conditioning. They're forced to keep the windows closed because they don't want people listening in. Fully 25% of the people who participated abandoned the volunteer group project before it was done.
Wow.
Fully 25% of those people were like, listen, it's been real. Best of luck to you. I gotta go.
I'm out.
I gotta go home now. This was not a fun endeavor for most people. So there really was this idea of like, get it done. Put something down on paper so we can wrap this project up. So it's now like mid-September, and nobody wants to prolong this process. Also, remember how difficult travel was in the 1700s? If you live in Vermont, it takes you weeks and weeks and weeks to actually travel home via horse. Okay.
Yeah. You're not hopping on a plane in first class, with the martini in your hand. That's not the situation. Yeah.
Via horse. Okay. And and winter is coming in New England. By September, it's on the horizon. We got to get something down on paper. So it was added to the Constitution at the last moment because they knew they did not want the popular vote, and they could not agree on anything else. They needed to just get something down. And then they said, we will add 2 ways to change the Constitution into the document. And they did. They added 2 ways to change the Constitution into the document itself, with the forethought that we will not have been able to think of everything. We will not have been able to anticipate every possible future event. So you're going to have to make changes, and here's how you will change it. You have 2 options: change it this way or change it this way. If you need to change it in the future, go ahead. And they fully intended for the Constitution to be changed as needed. And you can see evidence of that with the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was not in the Constitution when it was first signed. And in fact, Rhode Island was like, we will not be signing until it is added. So they finally talked Rhode Island into doing it. They're finally like, listen, just sign it. Okay. Just sign it, and we'll add it later. And they did. Yes, exactly. Imagine a pinky swear working today. Like, just sign and we'll fix it later, guys. That would never happen today.
Come on.
The idea that you would just sign it and fix it later, that seems ridiculous today, of course. But that's exactly what happened. So that's how we ended up with the Electoral College. A tiny group of dudes, a subcommittee from this volunteer group project, got together and was like, we got to get something down because we got to get out of Dodge. Here's what we came up with. And everybody was so tired, they were like, fine, we'll fix whatever issues we have later.
And what was the motive, though? But what was the reasoning behind the Electoral College? Like you said, it was so some people can't be fully represented. Is that kind of what I heard earlier? Is that the motive behind it?
Well, of course, yes, you want only the right people to vote. But the idea was that it was removing power from the hands of individual citizens and putting it where they believed it was safer. It was safer with electors that were chosen by the states. The state legislatures would be able to choose who would be an elector in the Electoral College. And that was a safer bet because they couldn't trust the general public. There was a strong distrust between people at the Constitutional Convention and the general public, who they viewed kind of as like, peasantry.
Yeah.
You're not educated enough to make these choices. You make ropes.
A little elitist here.
Yes. You make ropes. You grow cabbages. What do you know about governing? So it was viewed as an obstacle for the average person to be able to access the reins of power. And that was viewed at the time, Tim, as safer,
Hmm.
because who knows what will happen when the average person can access the reins of power. They might let women vote. They might let African Americans vote. That's what might happen, and we cannot have that.
Now, do states still choose their electors? Like in New Jersey, does the state legislature choose the electors?
That's a good question. And no, they do not. The
Anymore.
parties choose their electors. So the
RNC and DNC,
yes.
or the Republican Party and Democratic Party.
That's right. The
gonna choose their
Republican
electors.
Party of New Jersey chooses their electors, and the Democratic Party of New Jersey chooses their electors. Now, they might have slightly varying processes where some of them the electors might be appointed by a committee. In some states, they're elected by the actual party themselves. But becoming an elector in a state is very much like receiving an award. It's an honor to be an elector. It's like, Tim, you have been such a great Republican. In order to say thank you,
Right.
we would love to offer you a spot as an elector in the Electoral College, because your name goes down in history. The names of the electors are made public. They're printed in documents. Your name is on those certificates that get sent in. Your name goes down in history as an official elector, and it's an honor.
Okay, so let's just do like the process. So, okay, it comes up for election time. I, Tim Whitaker, in my state, I vote in my precinct, right? I cast my vote for Sharon McMahon for president. Now, in New Jersey or any state, whoever gets even by 1 percentage point the majority of that vote overall, that party's electorates or electors are going to be the ones who get the power to say in New Jersey, cast their electors for this person, and that's a law. Is that is that legally binding? Meaning, like, once that happens, according to New Jersey's law or whatever state's law, once that majority happens, those electors are going to get it.
That's correct. That's
Electors,
absolutely right.
whatever.
Yes, they're called electors, and
Thank you.
your state's your state's Republican Party, or in the case of New Jersey, most likely the Democratic Party.
Always
Only the Democratic electors show up to participate in the Electoral College. The Republican electors stay home,
and legally they have to. That's the law.
The law
that's
is
not a gentleman's agreement.
Democrats.
That is legally, this is what's happened. This is the result.
Right. Yes.
And
only those electors show up.
Can those Democrats cast their electors or whatever? Sorry, I get this confused.
Votes. They cast their votes.
Can they cast their votes for any president? Like, in theory, could they say, we changed our mind, we want the other president? Could that happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the past, yes, that happened all the time. And that's why you see these like really disparate votes in early America. But the people who are called who don't vote for who they're supposed to vote for, they're called faithless electors. And most states now have faithless elector laws that make it so that you cannot vote for whomever you want. Most states now have laws that require the electors for, let's just say, Hillary Clinton in 2016. Yep. If you are a Hillary Clinton elector, you must vote for Hillary Clinton. Or in some states, it's actually a crime to not vote for the person that you have pledged to vote for. In other states, the person elector can receive a fine. In other states, their vote is thrown out. So not 100% of states have eliminated faithless electors, but most states do have faithless elector laws that make it so you cannot cast your ballot as an elector for whomever you choose.
Let me try and put 2 and 2 together for the first time, and you can fact check me on this. So what I'm hearing you say is that the original notion for having the Electoral College was to make sure that the common person didn't have too much power, right?
Yes, that's right.
And it sounds like one of the ways that could happen is if a state voted for the majority candidate, the Electoral College before these laws could say, no, actually, we know better than you. We're going to cast it for this other person. But it sounds like these laws that you're talking about have maybe come into place to try and make sure that the will of the people, so to speak, or the will of the majority is no matter what represented by the electoral or by the people who are voting. Is that a fair kind of like way to think about this?
Yeah. Generally speaking, of course, there's nuance to like when did this happen and how many people and whatever. But yes, generally speaking, that we now have faithless elector laws to prevent rogue electors from just like, I am writing in Ronald McDonald.
Right.
And the reason for that is, there's several reasons, but one of them is the results of the Electoral College have been getting narrower and narrower as time has gone on. When you look at like the election results, the 1984 election results where Reagan was running for president, where
it's crazy.
He won 49 out of 50 states.
It's just red. It's a literal bloodbath. Like the whole U.S. is just red, besides like one state.
It's Minnesota only is blue.
The one holdout.
Holdout. And that was because his opponent was from Minnesota. But but that's not happening anymore.
Yeah, why? I've always wondered this because I have seen that map. I know exactly what you're talking about. I thought, wow, it's not nearly that clear these days.
No. And if you had a rogue faithless elector in 1980, who cares? Right? It doesn't actually matter. One vote for Ronald McDonald affects nothing, right?
It's a slam dunk, right?
Right. But when you have these very, very narrow paths to victory, they call it the path to 270. That's the number of votes that you need in the Electoral College. You need to get 270 of your friends to show up at these parties.
Right.
That path has become far narrower. And that the reason for that is very multifactorial. The United States has not had a central figure to rally around that has received a majority of support the way we did with FDR or the way Reagan enjoyed. That the central figure around which most Americans are like, yes, that concept has changed dramatically. The makeup of the United States has changed dramatically as boomers have begun to die off and Gen Z has started voting. When demographics change, elections change. That's just how it is. And so the United States has had demographic change over the last 40 years in a variety of ways. But we've also had movement around the country as people have become more mobile. You don't always stay where you were, where you grew up. And so you have people that used to live in California. Now they're moving places like Arizona, Texas, Tennessee. So as people become more mobile, the demographics of an area change. And thus the results of elections change. Things are closer now than they have been in the recent past. And so those kind of faithless elector laws, which there was actually a Supreme Court case about them, where the Supreme Court case said faithless elector laws are permissible. And so once faithless elector laws became constitutional, or they were deemed constitutional, states kind of rushed to adopt them so that the will of the people would be represented in the Electoral College in their state.
Hi friends, if you're enjoying this video, I have a favor to ask. The New Evangelicals is a 501c3 nonprofit, and if you've looked around at all, you've probably noticed that we don't offer member subscriptions on YouTube or Patreon options. The reason for this is very simple. It's been our mission since the beginning to offer all of our content and community resources completely paywall free. What this means is that we are completely dependent on the generosity of people like you who donate to make this work possible and accessible for all. If our content has helped you, would you consider donating to keep it all going? You can find the link in the description of this video, and to be very clear, this is not about giving to God or something like that. We're not a church and this is not a tithe. The ask is so simple. If our work has helped you, would you be willing to help us make this content accessible to more and more people? All donations made in the US are tax deductible and every bit helps. Thank you for your generosity. Can you explain to me how a presidential candidate can win the popular vote, but still lose the electoral college and lose the election? Because to me, based on what we're describing, it sounds like they would be pretty synergistic. But I know, like, and maybe this stat's wrong because of whatever I heard it from, but I heard that like something like the majority of Democratic presidents have enjoyed getting the popular vote, but have lost the electoral college in several major elections. I'm not sure if that's true or if I've heard that. How does that happen? Like, how does the majority of people vote for a candidate and that candidate not actually get into office?
Yeah. Well, it's not the majority of Democrats, but it has happened a couple of times in history, a few times in history, and it's happened twice recently.
Okay.
Right? So it happened in 2016, where Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the election. And that is because every state has a minimum number of electoral votes. The minimum number is 3. So even tiny states like Wyoming that have fewer people live in this entire state of Wyoming than live in the District of Columbia. Wyoming is a tiny state population-wise. They're still going to get 3 electoral votes. Whereas California, that has more than 30 million people that live there, they get the maximum they've ever had was, I think they currently have 53 electoral votes. I think they used to have 55 and now they have 53. I'd need to fact check if it's 53 right now, but it's, low 50s. California with 30 million people does not get proportionately more electoral votes. Right. So if you take the population of Wyoming, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 500, 600,000 people in Wyoming.
Yep. 54, California.
54. Thank you. If you look at the population of Wyoming, which has like somewhere between 500 and 600,000 people, roughly in that range, and they get their minimum of 3 electoral votes. If you take that base number of 3 electoral votes, and then you say, well, then if 500,000 people, just using a round number, get 3, how many should 30 million get?
Right.
How many should 30 million get? Well, they don't get that number. So if you think, okay, so then if 500,000 is 3 and 1 million is 6 and 30 million, they should theoretically be getting like 72 electoral votes to have actual proportional representation. But they don't. They don't, because there's a pie of electoral votes that gets divided up. There's 538 electoral votes. And so when there's a set number, there's 538, which is why you need 270 to win. You need a majority to win.
Who makes these numbers up, by the way? I got to ask, like, where did 538 come from? Was it just like abracadabra, 538, and then we divide it among 50 randomly? Like, how did that even happen?
Yeah. Well, it's equal to the number of people in Congress plus the District of Columbia. So it used to be 535. And then in the 1960s, when the District of Columbia began to be allowed to participate in the presidential election, they did not get to start participating until the 1960s. Then they added 3 more electoral votes to the system. So now there's 538 that gets divided up amongst 50 states plus the District of Columbia, amongst 51 entities. This 538 has to be divided, and nobody can get fewer than 3.
I always thought it was based on population size. Like, because like New Jersey has 8 million people inside it. I'm like, okay, so but it never fully added up. So I'm like, okay, I don't understand how some of these numbers work. So and maybe you answered this and I just missed it, but how do these get divided up? Like who determined California gets 54 and not that proportionate number of
Why don't they get 72? If the minimum, if Wyoming gets 3, why doesn't California get 72? It's because they have only a set number. And everybody has to have a minimum of 3. So that only leaves this much of the pie to divide up again amongst these really, really popular states. So the way that it is decided is after each census, and we have a census every 10 years. So after each census, there is actually a commission that goes through and reassigns the number of electoral votes amongst states. Now, a state can grow in population, like California, and decrease the number of electoral votes it has, which is what happened in 2020. Because we are dividing up this pie amongst 51 entities, but nobody can get fewer than 3.
I'm no academic historian or scholar or expert, but that math ain't mathing to me.
It doesn't math. The math does not math.
Okay, I'm not missing something, right?
No,
Like, this is not a
no, the math
partisan
does not
statement.
math.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, the math does not math.
Okay.
If you look at, you can
I feel
Google,
better now.
yeah, you can Google the number of electoral votes in 2020 that each state had, and then the number of electoral votes, or actually it would be 2020, the 2020 election, right?
Yeah.
And then Google the number of electoral votes that each state had in 2010, and you can see how they shifted. You can see that like we had to take one away from New York, even though New York is like not shrinking. This country is not getting smaller.
Right. We're only growing.
It's only growing. But yet we are not expanding the number of electoral votes. What we're doing is continuing to dilute the votes of Americans because we have this set number of electoral votes, but an increasingly larger and larger and larger population that is being represented by those votes.
Okay, one thing I like about you, Sharon, a lot is that you say, and I started using this line thanks to you. You've influenced me as an influencer. It is principle over party, right? This idea of like, what are the principles? I'm curious, just for from your perspective as someone who does this work, who knows so much about it. Does that system like seem to be like the best setup that we could be doing? Are there other, I'm sure you're not the first person to think about this stuff, and neither am I. I'm sure there are people out there saying, hey, this actually isn't making sense. It's not actually representing all of the people in America equally and fairly when like these states and their votes are just so disproportionate. And I'm thinking now I'm putting two and two together, because I have heard some people, depending on where they are politically, say, no, the electoral college is key and we have to keep it and we can't get rid of it. And for other folks say, no, we have to get rid of it. It is stopping democracy or fair elections, whatever. I'm sure there's some extremism in both of these camps. How do you think about statements like that? And how do you read this whole situation?
Yeah. Well, I have a whole series of proposals that I would like to make when it comes to changing the election system in the United States. Okay. The election system has morphed into kind of like a grotesque two-headed monster that was never anticipated by the framers of the Constitution, that the framers of the Constitution today would be like, you've got to be kidding me. This is not what we intended. And there's a number of things that I would like to see changed, which I, for the sake of time, I won't go into all of them now. But one of the things that I think is important for people to understand is that democracy thrives with competition. We should want all of the best ideas on the table, right? We should not just be like, the only people allowed to bring forth ideas are Tim and Sharon. Right. What if Kelsey has a fantastic idea? Too bad. Kelsey's not a candidate. We can only have two. We can only have Tim and Sharon. That's it. Sorry for the rest of you. So we really do. We're at a point in the United States where we need to make a decision. What is more important to us? Keeping the tradition of the Electoral College, or allowing for the proliferation of more candidates and parties? Which is more important to us? Because we can't have both. We cannot have both of those things. We cannot have third-party candidates. We cannot have 5 choices on the ballot instead of 2. We cannot have that and keep the Electoral College. The math does not math. It is nearly impossible to have more candidates, more options, a better representation on the ballot, which I think is better for democracy. The majority of Americans do not feel well represented by the two-party system.
I don't.
They do not. Right.
I don't.
The majority of Americans do not feel well represented. Now, you might like an individual congressperson. You might like the president. You might like individual actors within the government, especially if they represent you. But
Andy Kim, he's my guy. He's in my state. He's literally my rep, and I'm a huge fan of Andy Kim, right? So that's an example of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love what he did on January 6th. He went up there and he's like, I'm going to clean this up.
Such a fan.
I'm going to clean it up. Like, that's, you got to tip your hat to that, man. Like, most people,
absolutely.
Yeah. Most people would not be like, let me clean up the broken glass. So you have to give that to him. Absolutely. I love that. That's an example of like putting country before your party allegiance.
100%.
I'm a fan. Okay. Anyway, Most Americans do not feel well represented by the two-party system. Too often, we are forced to make a choice that is between the lesser of two evils. We're like, I actually really don't care for either of you. I
No.
have to hold my nose and press the button. I don't like the fact that you did X, Y, and Z. That is not reflective of my views at all. But my other choice is somebody who is, also terrible in a worse way.
Yeah.
So if we want more and better options, the only option is to eliminate the Electoral College. And I would add there are other things that need to go along hand in hand with that. But the Electoral College keeps third-party candidates from winning, whether that's RFK or anybody else.
Okay, this is actually a good full circle moment. So we've established why third-party candidates do not get really any serious traction because of how the Electoral College and stuff is set up. It's a winner-take-all scenario in 48 out of 50 states, and it's just impossible. That makes sense. But and on top of that, and maybe I'm wrong, again, would love your thoughts. I would imagine that there is an incentive by both of these major political parties that are billions of dollars funded. I mean, listen, being at the DNC was like, wow, this is a spectacle. Like, there's a lot of power here. There's a lot of money here. There's a lot of balloons here. there's a lot of everything here, right?
Yes.
I would imagine that there is an incentive for both of those parties to do what they can to maintain the status quo because, a 50% chance of winning is better than a 33.333% chance of winning, right? And so I feel like there's maybe two at odd forces where there are people like us who are like, hey, thinking about these things differently might actually help us, right? And they might go, well, maybe for you, but for us, it doesn't. And we have the levers of power and we kind of control how our elections are run. So no, thank you.
You're 100% correct in that the two parties benefit from there being two parties.
That makes a lot of sense.
You're absolutely right. There's no question. This is a misconception that I think many Americans have, which is that, well, I'm going to vote for a third party candidate so that we will show how viable a third party candidate is. If, John Smith gets 25% of the vote, then, John Smith is going to get a seat at the table. That is the mentality that some people have. And that is just patently false. If John Smith is a threat to the current power dynamic, both of those groups have a vested interest in making sure John Smith does not get a seat at the table. It's not going to make them be like, oh, you know what? John did have some great ideas. What if we let him get elected instead of us? That's not how number one, how organizations work, but that's also just not how the human mind works. We're not like, you're a threat to my power, so let me share my power with you. Most often, that is not how humans have played it. They would rather conspire with each other to maintain the two-party system than to build a bigger tent. And you can see this in a variety of ways. The Presidential Debate Commission, for example, is made up. Everybody's like, well, it's a bipartisan debate commission, et cetera. Sure. Key phrase on bi.
Yeah, bi.
Right? Bi.
Not tri.
Partisan. Right.
Not quad partisan.
Right. And so they when they were really powerful, the Commission on Presidential Debates, they set a very high threshold for participation in the debates. You had to be polling at 15% nationwide. That's a very high bar for a third-party candidate to meet.
Right. Because the money that it takes to run the ads, to even get awareness, to get spots. And you think about just how media, right? And look, one thing I learned at the DNC was how interconnected these parties are to different media outlets, right? I have a friend who knows this person that's CNN. We can get on CNN tomorrow. We can get on ABC tomorrow. Those networks are built in these parties. They're not nearly as built in the Green Party or whatever other party might be running, right? And so there's a huge disadvantage on every level to get even close to that polling number because you're out financed, you're out networked, and you're also out established, right?
That totally. So, you don't have the ground game that these big parties have, where it literally takes teams of tens of thousands of people to get somebody elected. And both Biden and Trump in the year 2020, each of them spent $1 billion each. $1 billion each. Okay?
I'm
We
crying.
can all think of better things to do with $2 billion than print flyers and buy ads on football games. We can all think of better things to spend $2 billion on. But the idea that that just if you vote for a third party candidate, that they'll somehow get more money, they'll somehow get a seat at the table, unless we make structural changes to the system. And I'm not saying don't use your voice how you want. I'm not saying you can't vote third party or you should never vote third party. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying these are the realities. Yes. And if you vote third party, you should do so making an educated choice, knowing what the true realities of the situation are.
Okay, two questions, and then we can wrap it up here. This is first off, very informative. Helps me really understand better how this system actually works. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Two things. I mean, one is you kind of hinted at some other alternatives. I've heard the term ranked choice voting. Mm-hmm. What is that? And do you think that's a viable reality? Not solution. I mean, in theory, there's all kinds of solutions. Is that a viable place to ever get to in the U.S.?
There's a big movement afoot for ranked choice voting, especially when it comes to primary elections and to elections that are more local, like a city council election, for example. Or your state legislatures. Ranked choice voting is kind of having a moment. There's a bunch of ranked choice voting ballot propositions in different states. Alaska uses ranked choice voting. Some states use it for local elections. So citizens are sort of becoming more aware of what it even is and what its benefits are. This is a little bit like what ranked choice voting is. Yeah, let's say I give you 3 choices for dinner, and your choices for dinner are ice cream, Brussels sprouts, or sewer runoff. Okay? Those are your 3 choices.
Wow, I was not ready for that third one. I was not. Right? I'm thinking like steak, chicken, maybe. No, sewer runoff.
Sewer runoff. Okay. Obviously, like most people would be like, well, I'm going to go with ice cream. That seems the most delicious. Right. In this scenario, the ice cream is whichever party you like the most. Right. What ends up happening if you vote for your third party candidate, ice cream, very often what happens is you end up affecting the election indirectly instead of directly. What I mean by that is you know that your ice cream third party candidate doesn't actually have a chance at winning. But what you're doing is sort of siphoning off votes from somebody else. But what ultimately ends up happening too often is that when you vote for ice cream, you're actually helping sewer runoff win the election. When in reality, you would have a second choice in that choice of 3, right? Your second choice would definitely be Brussels sprouts.
Right.
Because Brussels sprouts are at least edible.
Totally.
You're not going to go to the hospital having Brussels sprouts. You would definitely have a second choice. And you don't realize when you don't have ranked choice voting that too often voting third party is like helping sewer runoff win instead of getting your second choice. If I had known that voting for ice cream was helping sewer runoff win, I would have just voted for Brussels sprouts to begin with. So what ranked choice voting does is it allows you to say, okay, my first choice is ice cream. And if ice cream doesn't win, my second choice is Brussels sprouts.
Right.
Which people find far more empowering to be able to say, my second choice is Brussels sprouts. I would never want to have sewer runoff. Never. Sewer runoff gets no votes from me. My second choice is Brussels sprouts. That feels more empowering to people than inadvertently helping somebody else win because of the way votes get siphoned off of that person.
So in this scenario, let's just say that you're a big fan of ice cream. For some reason, I want sewer runoff. But if we both have the same second choice of Brussels sprouts, that Brussels sprout choice for dinner is what would happen because we both actually agreed on choice number 2.
Or more likely what would happen, yes, that could happen, but
Okay.
what would more likely happen is like all of the people who voted for ice cream, which is, a third party candidate who can't actually win, then because that person did not win, they take those people who voted for ice cream, they take their second choice and they say, okay, we're actually going to allocate your votes to Brussels sprouts because Brussels sprouts is your second choice.
Got it.
Now everybody who voted
Right.
for ice cream gets to cast their ballot.
Right. Your
for
voice
Brussels
still
sprouts.
counts. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's not
That
just
makes
eliminated.
a lot of sense.
It's not just eliminated. You get to say.
I like that a lot. I mean, and that's kind of like the American dream, right? Like we love consumerism. We love just more and more options and choices. And just this kind of fits that. Like I want more options for people that I want running for political office, right? That I know beyond just being altruistic or standing on principle, this vote will do more than that, right? It will do more than just self-soothe the fact that I didn't vote for either of the evils. I went with the person I really wanted, knowing it did absolutely nothing long-term, right? This seems like it actually gives a both and where you can vote your principles and vote who you really want and also give a secondary option that you would also be like, hey, not my first choice, but better than sewer runoff. Yeah. Okay.
It's a little bit like, you know what? I like Sharon. I like Tim. I'm gonna have to give a little edge to Sharon. She has more government experience. But you know what? Tim's solid. I'd take Tim as a second choice.
Right.
Versus my third choice is Hitler. No, I would like to cast a second vote. My second option is Tim.
Right.
So that feels a lot better to a voter. Than just if you vote for Sharon, you're actually voting for Hitler. That is like, excuse me, how does that make sense? But in reality, what I'm doing is I'm taking votes away from Tim. So Tim cannot get a majority, and it helps Hitler, which again, I'm not saying any candidate is actually Hitler. I'm just using a bad example of a terrible leader from the past.
Right, totally.
Wouldn't it be better to actually reallocate my votes to my strong second choice than to allow, to siphon them off and allow a really, really horrible option to come to power?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, last question then. Will this ever happen? Like, will we ever get to a point where our big elections, which by the way, another observation, I didn't realize that these aren't like federal elections in the sense of like the federal government oversees them. The states oversee their own elections. Then they come together and say, here we go. This is the person that we elected for federal office. That's interesting. But like, okay, I mean, it seems like the deck is kind of stacked against us, though, because there's a lot of incentive to maintain the status quo for those who are in political power, for those who have a lot of money, and for the candidates that are running, and also that are in Congress, right? The majority of people in Congress are Democrat or Republican. So how would this change ever happen? Like, is there a path forward? Is there a path to 270 for us common folks? Right, to actually get these changes done that seem very common sense and also that give more people more fair representation and give their vote the same equity that other people's votes have?
Yeah. It's a great question. So the lowest hanging fruit is to change how electoral votes are allocated, because that can be changed at the state level with just passing a law. That's all it requires. You don't have to change any federal constitutions. Changing the Constitution, of course, is an option, but that's much harder. So the lowest hanging fruit is to change how New Jersey allocates its electoral votes. A lot of people feel like it is not fair that my votes for president, if 49.9% of the people in this state vote for Brussels sprouts, why my votes are literally erased? They're literally discarded.
Right.
And only the ice cream votes are counted. Right? That seems not fair at all. And that's the legitimate truth of what happens is in the presidential race. So the lowest hanging fruit is to say, New Jersey, we are going to reallocate our electoral votes based on proportionality, meaning if this candidate gets 55%, they're going to get 55-ish%. I know the numbers don't make perfect one to one. 55% of the electoral votes and 45% of the electoral votes are going to go to Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
2 states already use a form of proportional vote allocation. And there's no shortage of ways you could structure how this works. All it would take is your state changing a law. That's all it would take. And that would then permit voters to feel like their votes actually matter, that some of the electoral votes are going to the person I voted for.
Right.
And it wouldn't be a perfect one-to-one with the popular vote, but it would get a lot closer.
A lot closer.
A lot closer.
Winner take all. And
Yes.
also, it would incentivize both sides for voter turnout, right? Because, for example,
Totally.
in New Jersey, New Jersey has always voted blue in federal elections for like ever, right? I mean, we
Yes.
had Governor Christie on a local level, but federally, it's always blue. Well,
Yes.
if all of a sudden in this hypothetical, right, New Jersey's like, actually, we're going to do more of like a percentage and with how we divvy this up based on votes. Now, people who are more conservative feel, well, now my vote actually means something.
Totally.
And people who are more liberal think, well, no, my vote actually means something now.
Yes.
Like this actually
Yes.
could change an election, right?
That's
so
right.
I think it would only incentivize turnout.
I totally agree. It would incentivize voter turnout. You would feel like you, especially if you live in a deep red or a deep blue state, that your vote actually does matter. It would also change candidate behavior. Because right now, deep red and deep blue states get no attention from the candidates.
We get nothing.
Yeah,
I get nothing in New Jersey.
Nope.
Nothing.
You're not going to see Kamala or Trump campaign in California. Because we already know how that's going to go down. So, and then studies show that after the elections, swing states get more federal dollars directed their way. Because, for whatever reason, subconsciously,
coincidence.
Coincidentally. So candidates care more about the issues that affect swing states than they do about the country as a whole. If the candidate had to compete in every single state, because every single vote counted, either by using a proportional allocation of the electoral college votes or by using the straight popular vote, you would also see a change in candidate behavior. They would not ignore New Jersey and California. They would have to compete in every state for every vote because every electoral vote would matter. So that is that's the lowest hanging fruit, is to just change the way we allocate electoral votes state by state. Another thing that can easily happen is something called, and again, simple doesn't mean easy. Simple doesn't mean like snap your fingers.
Just change the law. How hard can it be, right?
Yeah, right. But your state
One
laws
does
are
not
actually
simply
pretty
walk
hard.
through more doors, Sharon.
But your state laws are easier to change than you realize, right? Like we think about changing a law in Congress. Your state laws are easier to change than you realize. Another thing that is sort of moving around the country is something called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And this is an agreement between states who want to sign it. A compact isn't it like a contract or an agreement that says we will allocate all of our electoral votes to whoever wins the popular vote nationwide.
Oh.
And this compact will not go into effect until enough states have signed on. And the idea is, if enough states sign on, that 270 electoral votes are represented by the signees, then it would guarantee that whoever wins the popular vote wins the electoral college, because all of those states will say, whoever wins the popular vote is going to get our votes.
I like that.
And so it's an end run around the electoral college. It's still participating in the electoral college. It's not erasing it from the Constitution, but it's just reallocating how those votes are, how they're assigned. We have not always used winner take all. Winner take all was not the vibe in early America. Winner take all is not in the Constitution. There's nothing that says we have to use winner take all. States can decide for themselves how they want to allocate those votes. So those are two ways that are like relatively low hanging. All it would take is changing a state law, either signing the NPVIC or using some kind of proportional allocation of electoral votes. And of course, we could change the federal constitution too, but that's much harder and longer. Yeah. Yes.
I feel like especially now with it's so bipartisan, it would be like a nightmare to even think about doing that.
Totally.
One thing I appreciate though about, bringing folks like you on who have this historical acumen and are able to kind of place us in history is that it tells us that things change. I think a lot of people listening, and I'm one of them, just kind of always thought like, well, this is how it's always been. So we don't want to change things. But no, like things have changed throughout history and things can change again.
That's right.
Amendments have been made to the Constitution before. They can happen again, right? And that's important for us to have that permission, maybe is a good word.
Yes.
Of like, no, we can take, the American experiment and kind of own it as this generation and this group of Americans going through time and molding it to what's happening in our cultural and historical moment for the good of all of our neighbors, right? We're not this is not some like fixed situation.
Static fact. It's not the Bible.
Right. It's not the Bible.
It's not the Bible where people believe like you're not allowed to add or subtract one word because that is heretical. It's not the Constitution is not the Bible. The Bible doesn't say here's how you can change me.
Right.
Here's how you can add new things to me. Here's two
Here's
different ways. Right. The Constitution is not a holy text.
Right.
It is a governing document that fallible human beings wrote up. And they were like ready to be done with their volunteer group project. And they're like, I think we got some good ideas in here, but you know what? If y'all need to change it in the future, here's how you might do that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Sharon, I feel like you really have helped, at least me, I'm sure the audience, better understand how these elections actually work. Because I think we take this stuff for granted. We just hear terms and we just think, well, I don't know all the nitty gritty, but sure. But this is helpful to understand how these things got here, how the Electoral College actually works versus the popular vote, and then also what we can do on a small pragmatic level to advocate for more equal access for our votes to all count equally instead of some being highlighted over others, So I really appreciate you making time. It's super helpful. And of course, it's always good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks, Tim.
When does your book come out? Is it already out?
September 24th.
This will be out before then. So pre-order Sharon's book.
The Small and the Mighty.
Do it. I'm in. All right. Hey, have a good book tour. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Tim. We'll talk soon. Have a good day. Bye. All right.